after we look at all of the evidence that the biblical account of Noah's Ark is not a myth, it's not a fable, it's not some fanciful story. The facts support the view that Noah's Ark was large enough to carry the number of animals required, and that Noah and his family were capable of caring for them during their time on the ark. I think I shared this with you once before, but some years ago, Barbara and I and a couple of our kids, the two younger ones, were in the area of the Grand Canyon. And we were standing up on the top and looking down into the depths of that canyon, and it was quite a ways down. And the guide there, the state guide, I don't know if he was state or a federal employee, probably federal. But anyway, the guide said, I want to show you something interesting, folks. And he reached down and he took a handful of the earth that was there. And he kind of shook the dirt through his fingers and left in his hand, he had a handful of seashells. And he said, we don't really know why, but this area must have at one time been covered by water. There must have been a sea here. And this area is just covered. He said, anywhere you go around here, you can find seashells. And I raised my hand, as I often do at these kinds of things, and he said, yes. And I said, could it be that that was part of Noah's flood? And with a voice that you could recognize he was rather perturbed with me, said, are you a Christian? I said, well, yes. Well, you Christians always have to come up with this flood theory, you know. Excuse me, I'm sorry, sir, but you just told me it was covered with water. I mean, I'm just asking, right? But we do know this, don't we? We know, at least I believe that the flood story is true. And that the flood was a universal judgment of sin. God destroyed the world that existed at that time. And when we look at nature with all of its testimonies, we're viewing a reminder that God does judge sin. By the way, there also at the Grand Canyon, inside the museum, there was another possible explanation of that region. And of course, you know that, if you follow the science, it tells you this. This river dug this canyon. Right? That's the science. This river dug this canyon. Maybe it did, following an earth-wide flood. I can imagine, can't you, if those waters were receding as quickly as the Bible says, that in some places they would have dug canyons and maybe left a river at the bottom. But inside the museum is a story from the local Native Americans. And their story goes like this. The people on earth had somehow, and I don't remember the exact words, but they had irritated the spirits. And in their irritations, the spirits sent a great flood upon that region of the earth. And that flood caused a sea to be there, and that sea, when it receded, it created the canyon. And by the way, if you look at the canyon walls, you can see that the sediments especially if you're a geologist and you go in there and you measure what's there, that you can see layers of different kinds of materials in the walls of the canyon. And those who have studied it say it's rather interesting that the heavier sediments are at the bottom and they go up to the lightest. Well, isn't that what would happen if floodwaters were receding? The heavier materials would sink to the bottom. The next layer would be something a little bit lighter and a little bit lighter and up until you get the lightest material. And then what would you be left with on the top in a case like that? Seashells. So the local Native Americans have a folklore story. Oh, and by the way, there was a Native American, or we used to say Indian, that's not the right term anymore, but a Native American who was saved in a boat. So their story is closer to the biblical story than what the scientists there tell us. But we see that God judged sin and that he promised that he would never destroy the earth again in the same way. We also read this in the Bible, that one day this earth will be destroyed again by fire, and that God is going to create a new heaven and a new earth where there will be no more judgment